Hello, folks. We're down the line once again from Cape Cod tonight with political analyst, author, and historian Dr. James D. Boys. I'm Michael L. Roberts. This is the American Chronicle. We do warmly welcome you to episode 18 of the American Chronicle, an episode that sees a happy return to the new Voicing the World bunker in development here ahead of a potential lockdown 2, lockdown harder. Perhaps unsurprisingly, in tonight's discussion, James and I focused rather heavily upon the presidential debate this week between the sitting president, Donald Trump, and the former vice president, Joe Biden, with a healthy bit of humor thrown in relation to Donald Trump's tax returns for good measure. I began tonight's interview then by asking James for a rare gut-level reaction to the week's debate. So, James, on a scale of 0 to a car crash inside a train wreck outside of an airplane disaster, your gut reaction to the debate we've witnessed this week, please.
So every election cycle, one of the main things that people look forward to are the presidential debates, particularly the first presidential debate in a season, because it's always indicative of how it is that the rest of them will go. And boy, oh boy, did we learn something last night. Where to begin, quite frankly? Many people are expressing great surprise this morning at how it is that Donald Trump performed last night on stage with Joe Biden. To them, I say, what are you surprised about? Those of us who have been following Donald Trump's political career for many years looked at this and think, well, okay, well, this is Donald Trump being Donald Trump. And if you look back at his debate performances in the past, whether it was during the primary season against his fellow Republicans, whether it was 4 years ago against Hillary, or last night, you know, Jeb Bush is absolutely right. You know, he was a chaos candidate. He's been a chaos president, and he's running a chaotic campaign for re-election. That was demonstrated in spades, arguably, last night on the debate stage. You know, he wasn't going to morph into Cicero, quite frankly, in his final run for the presidency. People who keep waiting for Donald Trump to change keep being surprised that he doesn't. It's simply not going to happen. What he did do, arguably, was take his usual performance to a new low. And that's been, I think, demonstrated by the fact that even his usual supporters on Fox News, for example, have been critical, perhaps not quite as critical as commentators on CNN and MSNBC, but certainly Fox News has realized, I think, that last night was a car crash of a performance. The difficulty, though, is this. It's a car crash for whom? Who is seeing it as a car crash? Well, the left, moderates, perhaps. What do Donald Trump supporters make of it? Because this was Donald Trump being Donald Trump. And on several occasions, you have to say, well, he made some interesting points. I thought he opened quite well. I thought the first 5 to 10 minutes, Donald Trump was actually being quite restrained. And I put a couple of tweets out to that effect. Got shouted down, surprise, surprise, by a few people who said, well, that's like applauding an ape for not playing with his own excrement. I changed some of the language there. But very quickly, it deteriorated from that point. And I thought he went far too over the top. It's one thing to try to put your opponent on the defensive, which, of course, is part of the tactics in a debate. But I thought that Donald Trump did himself a massive disservice. He has a track record to run on. There are elements of it, it must be said, that are worth advocating. Just as Joe Biden would rightly say that there are also elements of his record in office which do not hold up so well. And that was what last night was meant to be all about, instead of which we're talking once again, perhaps not surprisingly, about Donald Trump and his own particular debating style. So much so, I should point out that in the last half an hour or so, the organization which arranges these debates is talking about changing the rules for the presidential debate to come, suggesting that they may well try to mute the candidates when it's not their time to talk. We will have to see how it is that Donald Trump reacts to that. I think he'll react poorly. One wonders whether he may even decide that he doesn't want to play by those rules, perhaps arguing quite rightly that the rules have been agreed upon already. Of course, the committee would then say, well, you've been breaking those rules by walking all over Joe Biden's time, for example. So we are in perhaps an era of flux in the 24 hours after the debates, with lots of people suggesting, for example, that Biden not participate in any moving forward. Clearly, there's going to be a change in the rules for any future debates. It would be a catastrophic mistake, I think, for Biden to try to walk away from this point. He said he won't. I think it would be perceived as a weakness if he were to do so. So let's wait and see what happens next.
A lot of that need for a mooting of the candidates and otherwise could be blamed squarely upon the moderator in this case, were we not dealing with a character like Trump. For our listeners, could you give us a sense of your impression of Chris Wallace, the moderator from Fox News' performance in this case, and the extent to which he did or did not control the situation as required?
Well, Chris Wallace has been pretty much universally condemned for his performance last night. This is intriguing, of course, because on paper you'd say, well, Chris Wallace, he works for Fox News. Fox News is always assumed to be in Donald Trump's camp. It should be pointed out, however, also that Chris Wallace has interviewed Donald Trump and given him quite a rough ride in the past. I don't think there's any great love lost between the two men. And many people, I think, hoped perhaps that Chris Wallace would be a good, solid host for this first debate. I don't think anybody, least of all Chris Wallace himself, could have imagined quite how Donald Trump was going to perform on stage last night. Indeed, Donald Trump has tweeted that it basically felt like 2 against 1, with him debating and competing not only with Joe Biden, but with Chris Wallace also. Of course, that's not the point. The idea is that you agree to the rules, you abide by them, and you debate in a gentlemanly fashion, if that doesn't sound too quaint. Very clearly, Chris Wallace was only going to be ever hosting this first debate. What will be interesting, I think, is how it is that the hosts moving forward react. We've got hosts coming up, for example, who work for C-SPAN. Now, C-SPAN, of course, is universally known, I think, in the United States for being very, very placid and non-confrontational and not interfering once a politician starts talking. So that debate is going to be fascinating to see, and it will be interesting to see the extent to which the rules are changed in an attempt to prevent the kind of chaotic argumentative scenes that you saw last night from continuing into future debates.
Yes, thinking of the static camera of C-SPAN in a normal setting, then that as you say, that certainly will pique the interest in terms of how the candidates deal with it and how the silent audience in the room respond or otherwise to that particular chemistry. As I was talking with you before tonight's recording, I found this debate somehow more uncomfortable than even the sort of nuclear button pressing of the Trump and Hillary debates of 4 years ago. To set the scene for our listeners and viewers who haven't yet seen the debate, could you give us a sense of what the key points of tension were between Trump and Biden in this week's debate, please?
Well, I think that there were eruptions, if we can call them that, throughout the evening. This was a 90-minute debate. I thought it got off pretty well. I might be unique in saying that, but I was relatively surprised by Donald Trump's posture to start with. He had the opening statement. I thought that was delivered fine. I was surprised, if I'm honest, by Joe Biden's opening and general performance. I thought that he seemed quite quiet. It overawed a little bit at times, if I'm very honest. So I thought he seemed tired. He seemed every one of his years, it must be said. Where life got interesting and why this is generating so much controversy, I think, is that on topic after topic, there was unseemly clashes between the two. It almost didn't matter what the conversation was because, of course, Joe Biden was attacking the president's 4 years in office. Donald Trump was, in his own way, defending his track record in office, but repeatedly doing so by effectively refusing to allow Joe Biden to get a word in edgeways, even when it was his allocated time. He was constantly interrupting the former vice president. Deliberate attempt, it must be said, I think, to get under his skin and to undermine him. I thought Joe Biden was stuttering at one or two occasions. And again, this speaks to what it is that Donald Trump was trying to do, which is to make him anxious, nervous, on the back foot, unable to deliver the kind of rambunctious debate performance which Joe Biden has, it must be said, given in the past. And it seems unfair to say this maybe, but you've got to give Donald Trump some credit, I think, trying to be as neutral as possible. That was possibly his debate technique going in, and it seemed to have worked because it simply didn't allow Biden to get into the flow of the debate. He was constantly being interrupted. Shouldn't have to tell anybody how difficult that is to try and deliver a performance in front of potentially 70 million Americans, knowing that you've got this glowering, looming presence to your right, constantly interrupting you, trying to undermine you. Some of the particular low points, it must be said, came when Donald Trump was asked by Chris Wallace directly to condemn the right-wing groups which have been on the streets, a group called the Proud Boys in particular. Donald Trump has been attacked widely for seemingly refusing to do that. Again, if you go back and actually listen to it, it is actually interesting because he initially says, well, of course I condemn them. I condemn them. Yes, I'll condemn them. And then he's asked, well, do so then.
Yes.
Clearly somebody wants them to say, I, Donald Trump, condemn this group, that group, and that group. And instead of which Donald Trump sort of said, well, which groups? Tell me which groups you want me
asking
to
for
condemn.
the definition, yeah.
I'm hearing as much from the left. And I think arguably, not defending Donald Trump in any way, quite frankly, but on several occasions, I thought both the moderator, Chris Wallace, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden all missed great opportunities to nail down the rhetoric and the tone here. At that moment, what you wanted was Chris Wallace to say, right, this is what I want. I think America needs to hear you say this. That didn't happen. Donald Trump is very, very adroit at, not only directing the traffic of national conversation at a national and international level, but I think he showed last night that he's very, very good at derailing even the most structured, planned out events and introducing chaos into the mix. He did that with regard to that question about condemning the violence we've seen here in the United States coming from the right. Later in the debate, Joe Biden brought his late son, Beau, into the mix as an attempt to identify with military families who have been rightly offended by what Donald Trump has said, calling fallen members of America's military losers, et cetera, and suckers. And again, then, rather than trying to work a decent structured answer with regard to that by acknowledging not only the service of Beau Biden and also acknowledging the many losses, it must be said, that Joe Biden's family have suffered over the years, including that of Beau Biden. Donald Trump seemed to be unable to raise to that occasion, and instead immediately went after Hunter Biden, who, of course, Donald Trump has been railing against for many, many months, if not years now, raising questions about his own business conduct. And I think that played particularly poorly with the viewers. It was certainly a mistake, I think, a tasteless move by the president on that occasion. But again, he wasn't the only one making mistakes last night, but he was certainly the elephant in the room, effectively trampling upon all the nicely arranged furniture.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Yeah, I got the sense with that the Hunter Biden, Beau Biden mix there was, whilst as you say, tasteless, was an attempt to get the blood up of Joe Biden to see, the only thing that he sort of provably snapped upon before is any relation to his family. And it was quite a moment, I felt, as he was making use of looking at the camera, as it were, and actually said, yes, my son had a drug problem, which he has now overcome. And otherwise, it was a sense that, as I understand it, the team necessarily hadn't prepared for with Joe Biden to go quite down that line. But in that moment, he was able to show a bit of strength in that sense. Insofar as so that felt like an intentional move by Trump to try and derail and bring disease to Joe Biden. But in terms of the broader sense of Trump's capacity to derail, how much of that do you feel is preparation, and how much of it do you feel is a matter of he's coming to the situation comparatively unprepared and almost like a human-delivered Twitter account in the moment, and it's that, in fact, that sows that chaos?
Look, Joe Biden and Donald Trump took very, very different approaches to these debates. Donald Trump has made great pains to stress that he has not been sitting down with briefing books, trying to digest facts and figures, as we have seen former candidates for the president of both parties do every 4 years. That is the norm, quite frankly. Donald Trump took a very, very different approach, trying to come at this with a greater sense of ease, for example, and not trying to sway his audience with an intellectual argument for his re-election. That, I think, is very much in keeping with his style. It was very much in keeping with expectation. One thing I was trying to get across on my Twitter feed in the hours leading up to the debate was the fact that, really this isn't about an intellectual debate. The debates are not an intellectual exercise here in the United States. We have seen time and time again, the more intellectual candidate, the more better prepared candidate, the candidate perceived to be the smarter one, lose repeatedly, going all the way back to 1960. I'm not trying to equate Donald Trump with Jack Kennedy here necessarily, but certainly in that debate, it was recognized that Vice President Nixon was seen to be, the better prepared candidate. He had spent hours reading through briefing documents. John F. Kennedy had certainly prepared for it, but one of the ways he prepared was by getting a decent suntan in Los Angeles before he flew into Chicago for that debate. Going forward, throughout the cycle, Ronald Reagan was always seen to be somewhat unprepared, and yet he managed to floor Jimmy Carter with a couple of good lines. When we think about, Al Gore and George W. Bush, that was a very similar case from 1960 once more. You had a sitting vice president, seen to be the smarter of the two, facing a relatively inexperienced individual with less time in public service, the son of a wealthy man, who again was seen to have the better of him, arguably in at least some of the debates, and who went on to win the presidency. So, this is, I think the Democrats all too often see the debates as an intellectual exercise to try to wow America with their candidates' nuance and smarts. And unfortunately, that hasn't always played well, allowing for the Republican to come in and totally undermine many Democratic candidates with a few good one-liners and appealing to America's emotional heartland rather than to its intellectual capacity, perhaps.
In terms of ideological pulls within that mix, obviously one of the key factors of the debate was this Proud Boys element, the far-right white supremacy group, as it were, which I believe it was Biden who prompted Trump in that moment to say, answer to label and say that you do not endorse the Proud Boys. And of course, we have that now landmark statement in which Trump says, "Stand back and stand by," which has that sort of almost instructive element rather than a condemnation, which has been picked up on particularly by the press as a hurtful moment in American history, as it were. To what extent in that comparative study was are the sort of Proud Boys pulling Trump's campaign approach to the right, and Antifa and the sort of more Bernie Sanders-esque elements of the Democrat Party pulling Biden to the left? And to what extent were they having to measure their performance against that sort of playground in the debate?
There's no doubt, I think, that both candidates have felt and are feeling the pull to the extremes of their parties. Now, that's not unusual in an American political election year, that both parties go to their party's flanks, if you will, to get the nomination. But what you usually see, certainly in the more successful candidates, is a race to the center, to move away from the extreme, to try to get those undecided voters in the middle and start eking into your opponent's support on the more moderate flank of their wing, effectively. You're really not seeing that, I don't think, this time round at all. Both candidates are playing more to their base. And, you know, if Donald Trump had a point at any time last night, there was one or two occasions when he turned to Joe Biden and said, "You've just lost the left, you've lost the left." Because he was successfully goading Joe Biden to come towards the center, to reject the sort of Green New Deals, the Bernie Sanders, the AOC position, suggesting at one point that there's no manifesto, I'm making it up effectively, I am the Democratic Party, he said at one point. So when he does that and Trump pulls him away from the more radical element of the Democratic Party, Trump knows that he's onto a winner because, as he says, you're losing the left. You've just lost the left. I think it was a great line. Much of what Donald Trump said was simply inappropriate last night. But if we're to be, candid and appropriate here, we do need to recognize where there might have been some degree of success. And not only was there a success in trying to undermine Joe Biden in terms of knocking him off his game, but if Trump can pull him away from the more radical elements of the Democratic Party, the more progressive elements, who, let's be honest about it, are not excited about Joe Biden's candidacy at all, and who may not even come out to vote, which would obviously completely sink his candidacy, then Donald Trump's job has been done. It will be fascinating to see in the next couple of days how the polling comes out with regards to this. But I worry that all polls, quite frankly, are going to be suspect until the actual election itself, because there is only one poll that counts. And one of the challenges is, as was discussed last night, we have a president who is throwing doubt upon the veracity of the polling system entirely here in the United States, rightly saying that come election night, we might not know the results. That's entirely possible. We've seen in the past the election go into the next day before knowing who the victor was. In 2000, of course, for a whole variety of reasons, nobody knew who the successful candidate was until mid-December, after a ruling by the Supreme Court. So I think that all these issues are going to play into the election this time round. And I wouldn't be at all surprised, quite frankly, if this election gets dragged on far beyond Election Day.
Speaking of far beyond Election Day, there was much has been made last night of this concept of who was the loser, as it were. Did Trump lose? Did Biden lose? Or did the American people lose? I felt several times that Chris Wallace was attempting to, in his questions that he had prepared, attempting to eke a vision of the next phase of America out of each candidate. To what extent did you feel either candidate successfully painted a picture of what their America would be in the next 4 years?
Poorly, I have to say. I don't think either man did what you associate with someone like Ronald Reagan doing, or John F. Kennedy doing, or Bill Clinton doing. Those three successful candidates were in part successful because they could portray an image of the America that they wished to deliver for the American people. They could portray a new frontier, as John F. Kennedy put it, for America. Neither man last night, I thought, seemed interested in doing that. Donald Trump talked about the success he'd had with the economy, the idea that once what he called the China plague had been dissipated, that economy would come roaring back. And agreed, indeed, in many ways, the economy is coming back. And it will be interesting to see the extent to which America rewards Donald Trump between now and Election Day for how it is that the economy does during that time period over the course of the next few weeks, quite frankly, because Americans have got a long track record of voting with their wallets. And if they're feeling well, if they're feeling positive and they're feeling ebullient about the state of the stock market, they tend to reward the incumbent, which would be devastating for Joe Biden, I think, at this point. But neither man really did a great deal about talking about the manifesto that they have put together. Both men have done so. Both parties have put together documents detailing what their plans for the next 4 years are. They're not widely read. They're not widely dissipated, because this is America, and in the United States, politics is very driven by personality, and this comes out time and time again. That's nothing new. You look about the candidates we've talked about, whether it's Kennedy, Reagan, Clinton, all three men were seen to have succeeded in part because of their personalities and their more attractive personalities, who can appeal more to the American electorate at a gut level. From 2000 onwards, there has been this idea that Americans will vote for the candidate that they'd rather have a drink with a beer with, even if that meant voting for George W. Bush, who, of course, was famously teetotal at that point in his life. You've got to ask a question. If you were offered a chance to have a beer with one of the two men last night, who would you have a beer with? I'll leave that for viewers to decide.
Time for a little political dessert, shall we say? No,
some levity.
Indeed, no American Chronicle this week would be complete without a consideration of the New York Times drop on Monday morning of Trump's taxes, as depicted by them. Your thoughts on the timing of that drop and the content of said drop, please.
Well, the question about Donald Trump's taxes has been going on for many, many years now, at least 4 or 5 years, I'd say, because, of course, it was a great question in 2015-16 when he announced his candidacy and became the only candidate in modern times not to release his tax returns. It came up in the debates with Hillary, when Hillary basically had probably very similar figures in mind when she suggested that Donald Trump wasn't paying taxes. He responded at that point, well, that's because I'm smart, suggesting that he was smart not to pay federal taxes. He seemed to get a pass on that, quite frankly, 4 years ago. And of course, if you hadn't noticed, he won that election. Now here we are 4 years later on, and the New York Times claims to have access to records, documentation, revealing this. It will be interesting to see the extent to which those documents actually get made public, so that everybody can actually see this. In the debate last night, Donald Trump was asked directly by Chris Wallace about this question. Again, Chris Wallace has taken a lot of hits over his performance last night, but he did have the common sense to come out and ask quite directly, Mr. President, how much did you pay in federal income tax? So Donald Trump is now on the record as saying that he paid millions of dollars, completely dismissing the reporting in the New York Times. So that if there is any evidence which emerges that the New York Times has the story right, that therefore Donald Trump has effectively lied to the American people, let's see whether that emerges before Election Day, because we've talked in the past about concepts of October surprises, the idea that something emerges late in the day to derail a candidacy. Very often that is something which is in the power of the incumbent to unleash upon your opponent. 4 years ago, of course, we can think about the Comey decision to reopen the investigation into Hillary's emails and the clear impact that had on her campaign in the last weeks of that campaign. Whether the New York Times reporting will have a similar impact upon Donald Trump's campaign for re-election, we will have to wait and see. But certainly, I would urge everybody to keep watching, get your popcorn at the ready. We're in for an interesting couple of weeks between now and Election Day, and arguably beyond.